in Florida in the public sector. They are facing a mortal threat as we speak. It's something, and I think they're figuring out that this is a much more difficult process.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Chris Townsend, the inimitable Chris Townsend, a supporter of working people everywhere, and always been a supporter of our project over here. Really appreciate your support generally, and tonight specifically. Chris, thanks for jumping on the stream with us.
No problem. Thanks.
So, when I mentioned to you that that we were going to be doing this, you gave us a few ideas and ideas that I thought were good. And the first one that you mentioned was the ATU down in Florida. You were you worked for ATU, started in Tampa, Florida, 1979, and helped organize ATU Local 1464, and they're now on the verge of being destroyed by the DeSantis anti-labor bill. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that. The history of that local generally, and where they are today, and why they are where they are today. Being kind of existentially threatened by this bill in Florida, which just to underscore exactly what it is, and maybe you can fill in some gaps here. My understanding of the Florida public sector labor bill is that if your membership drops below, your dues-paying membership drops below 60% of the bargaining unit, then it automatically triggers a decertification election, which you have to win. You don't have to get 60% of the vote, but you do still have to get 50% of the vote. So you have to run a campaign, and that happens annually. For every year that your membership is below 60%, you've got to run a campaign and win an election just to maintain your union membership, or just to maintain your recognized status as a union. And if you lose even one of those elections, you lose your recognition as a union, you lose any contracts that you've negotiated at the and it's just really, really bad. Additionally, with that bill, they took away dues checkoff. So not only do you have to keep your dues-paying membership up to 60%, now you've got to hound all of your members to pay dues instead of them being able to have it be part of their paycheck. You take out Social Security, you take out Medicare, and most union members also, their dues come out of their paycheck. Can't do that if you're a Florida public sector worker anymore. So, Chris, tell me if there was anything that I missed in that Florida anti-labor bill, and your thoughts on the situation as it relates to ATU Local 1464.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob, and thanks, Adam, for having me. And I appreciate everything you guys are doing. I mean, it's you do more for labor some weeks than what labor does for itself, and that's no exaggeration. And I am going to kick in myself. I haven't done it yet because I hardly ever do internet donations, so I'll either put it on my credit card and hold my breath, or I'll write you a check. But I'm going to put in $250 for the cause here, and the work that you're doing to support these strikes is crucial. And it's an interesting day that we do this, or that you all do this. And then I'll get on to the Florida question. But it's 136 years today that the 4 Haymarket martyrs were hanged in Chicago for the crime of demonstrating for the 8-hour day. It's recognized as a frame-up and an anti-union gang-up. And it kind of is the outrageousness of what was done to those 4. There was actually a 5th who was convicted, but committed suicide. But I'll read off their names. They should at least be repeated once in a while if you're familiar with the Haymarket frame up. It was Albert Parsons, Adolph Fisher, George Engel, August Spies were hanged 136 years ago today for the crime of advocating for the 8-hour day, framed up on the bogus charge that they had thrown a bomb or something. It was never proven. It remains one of those mysteries. Common belief was it was an agent provocateur, somebody from the police who did it in order to discredit the movement and unleash the repression against the labor movement at that time in Chicago. Louis Ling was the fifth, but he committed suicide in prison prior to being hanged. He cheated the hanging, so to speak. But anyway, it's and I'll say that I don't have a photographic memory. I actually didn't remember that, but I have a very good friend in Greece, Stathopoulos, who sent me that, and it just reminded me that our movement is truly a worldwide movement. That the 8-hour day movement was started here in the United States, and that May Day was therefore the commemoration or became the annual event that the U.S. labor movement followed religiously for decades as the day to demonstrate for 8 hours, 8 days of work, or 8 hours of work, 8 hours of rest, 8 hours for sleep. And in any case, 136 years ago today. And then I'm just offering that here at this early hour that it was someone from Greece, a longtime trade unionist. I've known Stathis for a long time, and he sent me an email and reminded me of that. So anyway, it truly is one of those things that is forgotten history here in the United States, or buried history, deliberately buried history, purged history, the entire story of the Haymarket 8-hour movement and the birth of May Day and whatnot. So anyway, I just mentioned that. And my last introduction here is I'll just commend you guys again for your fundraising, because I think our labor movement and our left fall down on the job more often than not when it comes to fundraising and dealing with financial issues, and you guys have taken this one on straight up. And I know when you got a hold of me, I thought, well, I'm not a pretty face and I'm not a name brand guy, so I thought, give me the middle of the night when you might have trouble finding people. So I'm actually very grateful that I got this slot, because I was expecting something like 4:30 a.m. or something, and I would have done it. Or maybe if you need it later on, I'll still be around. Just hit me up and I'll try to think of something worth listening to say, So anyway, so
yeah,
thanks
well, Chris, we've been fortunate enough to find people on the other side of the pond to fill some of the early morning slots. Here at 2 a.m., we're going to be talking to John Dunn, a miner from the UK, a former coal miner. And then Bhaskar Sankara, president of the nation, is joining at 3. He lives stateside, but he is currently in the UK right now.
Wow. Cool.
So, yeah.
Well, I'll since I guess we have ample time, I'll say it, as you guys grow and develop and expand and experiment and, plow ground here, you may want to experiment with an international labor, maybe on May Day, maybe by 1st of May, maybe get 5 or 10 people from around the world, 15, to weigh in. English is the universal language. It's a truism. And maybe you could have Radio Alabama here going worldwide. I'll just throw that as a free suggestion. I could help with wrangling up some of the this fellow that I mentioned, Stathis, he's from Greece, born in Greece, but he lived in Canada for many decades and is fluent in English, so a good example of that, So anyway, just a 5-cent thought tossed into the bucket here, but I just can't be more supportive and more happy of the work that you guys are trying to do, and just take it where it goes, take it in all directions. And don't, as you're not afraid to experiment and defy convention and get into some of the uncomfortable aspects, perhaps, of some of what we are, or maybe controversial to some. So anyway, keep doing this, and doors will open for you. So, with that, that's my preliminaries. And on Florida, I suggested that because I thought if you did have me on in the middle of the night, you might be fatigued and be tired of me and figure, well, what are we going to ask this guy to talk about again? And I thought maybe I better suggest some things. So you guys are always good with my suggestions because you don't, I'm always figure it's your show, it's not mine. I don't want to invite myself on the show and talk about what I want to talk about, but I think you guys have handled it very well. So
We're pretty
Florida.
simpatico.
Yeah, yeah. Honestly, if you ever want to say, hey, give me your show for a day, I don't think that. I think
well, I'll say this for. Yeah,
I think we'd be totally fine with whatever programming that you put up. We're definitely very simpatico, and
well, and that's true, and I commend you guys for that, and I appreciate it. I hope the listeners get something out of it. But I'll say that I learned to work with the media when I was a young man, when I was actually in Florida, what I'm going to talk about here, I promise. And the old guys who trained me, I was in Amalgamated Transit Union, Local 1464. And I was the kid. I was a very young kid, 17, 18, 19 years old. And I was a chatterbox and I was very energetic. And for whatever reason, they used to shove me out to talk to the media when we were organizing the blue and white collar workers of the city of Tampa. And one of the things they used to say to me, they'd say, hey, kid, go talk to this woman from the Tampa Times or the St. Petersburg Times or the Tampa Tribune. They were the two big newspapers. We even occasionally would have something or other we were doing where radio would come down. The guy would come with the little microphone and the TV on a couple of aspects. And I was a little bit mortified thinking, I don't know, am I really the guy that should be speaking for the local? And usually one of them would also say something too. But their admonition to me was to say, kid, talk to the media, tell the truth, don't swear, and please say something worth either writing down or listening to. And I thought, okay, well, that seems real easy, right? But anyway, it caught on. And then I realized over the years for the folks in the journalism craft profession, it's like a drive-in movie. You got to show something new every night. And they've got a job to fill up space and sell stories and whatnot. That's kind of the practical side of the journalism piece. So I guess I just developed the habit of being willing to suggest things to journalists. I have always found, unless they're not giving me the full skinny, that they seem to appreciate it because I can imagine, I think Mel Brewer was on here a while ago, and she was saying that, you got to feed that machinery and come up with ideas and interesting things and guests and new angles and plow the ground. So I have always found that the journalists that I've dealt with, a few might not admit to me if they don't like it, but they seem to appreciate it. And my feeling is, look, if only 1 out of 25 suggestions that I make sees the light of day, well, fine. Why wouldn't I want our story to be told? And, it's not for me to decide. I'm not the journalist. So in any case, you guys have always been great in that regard, and I appreciate it. And I think it contributes. I'm sure other folks do the same thing. So I think it contributes to the quality of your program. So anyway, back on Florida, I found myself as a young kid, got out of high school in Pennsylvania, migrated to Florida like 3 days later because there was no work at all in Pennsylvania for a guy of my age and skill set in 1979. So my uncle, who was a veteran, we should mention him on Veterans Day, William Harbison Townsend, a Korean War veteran, Bronze Star winner, and a man who ended up having profound regrets about that war and his role in it, and politically rethought that. And that's another issue. But anyway, I'm named after him. And he lived in Florida, so my parents weren't too freaked out that I had gone to Florida because Uncle Bill was there for me. And in any case, he got me a job with the city of Tampa. I was only there for a couple of days, and then on top of that, only a few days out of high school. And he took me over. One of the city detectives that knew my uncle. My uncle had a little bit of an alcohol problem, and he would sometimes not make it home from the gin mill on his bicycle. He didn't drive, he had a bicycle, and he would be gathered up by the city. And then at that time, in the old days, they used to just take you home. There was no drunk tank here that I remember down there. There was you didn't get arrested for anything. He wasn't doing anything. He just had too much to drink. So anyway, he knew the city detectives and the little drunk express that they would run. So he called Detective Frank Hansen, and he came and got me, and I was kind of unsure of this whole thing. I was like, I'm not high on cops. Well, what's he gonna do? Take me downtown and have me apply for a job as a police officer or something? I don't know. And I was protected from that because I was only 17, and I knew I was going to have to lie. I was out of high school in June, but I didn't turn 18 until September when my birthday is. So I thought, well, I'm probably not going to get hired anyway because I'm too young. You had to be 18 to get adult jobs, grown-up jobs, certainly any job that the city had. Well, anyway, he takes me down, and he knew everybody. Of course, he worked there, and he walks me through, and I'm thinking I'm getting some VIP treatment, and introduces me to a woman, and I fill out the paperwork. It was the old days of paper applications, and I lied. I told him my birthday was several days earlier than that. I told him I didn't have a driver's license, which was a lie, but I didn't want him to check. And in any case, I got hired into the sanitation department. Here I thought I was getting some big special treatment. All I got was a job on the back of the garbage truck. But I was grateful for it because I had nothing. I had no connections in a strange town, and there I was. But it was a year-round, full-time job. And I thought, well, your mother always warns you, and my mom sure did. Oh, Chris, if you don't go to college, if you don't become something and finish your education, you're going to be a garbage man. And, I thought, oh, God, here I am. I'm a garbage man. But I thought, well, the hell with it. I'm going to make best of it. So I got hired. I had to lie. Never was outed. This is one thing I should mention in today's employment regimen, the personnel or the HR regimen. One of the foulest deeds that gets done to young workers and new workers is just there's no mercy with the internet. At that time, if that was this time, if this 45 years later, if I had been trying that same gimmick, just to fudge a little bit about my age, I would never have been hired. I would have been instantaneously ruled out of that thing, banned for life, because it's, well, he came in here and lied, so we'll just put him on the pile, never to be, talked to ever again. This is sadly, the HR illness that we have in this country, the very sick HR regimen that we have too often. But anyway, I was able to evade that dragnet and get hired. And then I had to, at some point when I converted my license, I never gave it to the city because I was always afraid if they knew how old I was, they might fire. Everybody might remember in the old days, there was always this big disclaimer on the bottom of your job application. If we find that you falsified or lied in any way, for any reason, on any part of it, we're going to terminate you, as if it was some federal crime. So, that hung over me the entire time I worked there. But, as I found out, the city was such a poor employer at that time, such a low-grade employer in so many ways that the turnover was astronomical. And the likelihood that they would have fired me was probably there because of my union activity, but I wouldn't have been the first candidate. So anyway, I find myself working for the city, and to my great excitement, I found out that a union organizing drive was going on when I got hired.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
And it was interesting in the sense that they already had a local 1464, and it long predated that election. And as I got active, I had signed a card, I think the first week I was there, and then I started doing what I could do. There was this great worry that I was on probation, so they would fire me. So they gave me, the old guys that ran Local 1464 gave me a lot of things to do that, didn't involve immediately outing myself. But after a month or so, I got off probation and started, signing other people up and talking to folks. I was already a teenage leftist, so I had a great appreciation for the role of unions and, was motivated to want to do it. And in any case, I, was learning the history of Local 1464. Well, it's a remarkable history it's almost as if the local is now coming completely around the wheel in this regard. Local 1464 was chartered in the 1940s when it represented the National City Lines private bus company that ran the Tampa transit system. So this was an NLRB private sector group that had been raided repeatedly by an outlaw union. In the old days, the Brotherhood of Railroad Trainmen was a company union sponsored by employers, constantly attacking ATU and the Transport Workers Union. So they withstood that and maintained their representation of the National City Lines group all the way up through the late 1950s when, as happened all over the country for a lot of different nefarious reasons, all of the private companies that operated the bus and rail systems in the United States, they all bankrupted and just dropped all of the problem into the lap of the public sector, wherever they were. They just said, fine, we're out of here. National City Lines, goodbye. We're leaving. We can't make money off this system anymore, so screw you. Let you guys deal with the problem. So it created that panic situation in this country from coast to coast where all of a sudden the government entities, state and local, had to figure out how to maintain their transit system, run their subway, run their streetcar, if any of that was left, run their buses, to keep their cities moving, when all of a sudden the private company just walks off. Well, anyway, at the point that Local 1464 found itself abandoned, like the city abandoned, the city took over the transit system. Now, let's think like trade unionists. The public sector at that time in the state of Florida had no collective bargaining rights, no trade union rights for the public sector. So here comes a group of guys, solid, hardcore union men, left-wingers, it was all men in the transit piece at least. And they all of a sudden find themselves abandoned by their employer, but also losing their union rights under the NLRB. Suddenly they were now just abandoned. They were not private sector employees. So that just melted away in an instant. And they found themselves in a moment of desperation saying, well, what are we going to do? The city's not going to recognize us. The city of Tampa in 1958-59 was run by Dixiecrats and folks that would have liquidated them physically had it been able to figure out how to do it and not get caught. So they found themselves having to hold their local together through the hand collection of dues, meetings, and they would fight out little grievances, represent people as best they could, run little campaigns around shop issues. There was a real retrenchment of working conditions. The city wasn't bound by the union contract anymore they had, so everything seriously deteriorated. The wages were reduced, the entry-level rates. I mean, the city did whatever it could and wanted to, and wanted to save money. There was no real commitment to public transit or any of that. So anyway, from that real near-death experience, 1464 soldiered on through the 60s into the 70s in that sort of, I guess today some would call it a non-majority union, or we have contraptions like this in the country. You know, many people are familiar with them. These public sector groups that pay dues and do what they can in states that are retrograde or you've never had collective bargaining, or as they're doing now in Florida, getting rid of it. But they hold the union together, a little outpost to do what they can do. And of course, then always hope that the day will come when, you know, sanity will prevail and their rights will be restored to have an officially recognized union. So anyway, I'm learning this history, and what was fascinating about it in certain ways was that the late 70s come, and Florida was sort of modernizing ahead of the rest of the South. It had a big northern influx of voters, large African-American voter base, and the trade union movement at that time in the 70s was building up some momentum in Florida, and it was able to pass through the state legislature up in Tallahassee. It was able to pass through a collective bargaining act to create a state agency to adjudicate, elections for exclusive representation of units and allow public sector workers, state and local, to join unions, have elections and bargain contracts and all that. It was a very imperfect law, but what a breakthrough to finally have this. Well, the guys at 1464 were overjoyed. I remember them telling me, oh, we had parties. We spent some of that little treasury we had to celebrate. You know, that here they were 15 years after losing everything, seeing themselves able to rebuild and have their functioning transit local. Well, when they read the detail of the law threw them a curveball, and a big one, which was you couldn't have, under that state law that got passed, couldn't have a transit bus operator, bus mechanic local. If you were going to compete and try to gain representation rights, you had to organize wall to wall the entire city, blue and white collar. So this became the story of how Local 1464, after having toughed it out through a decade and a half of that almost impossible to believe survival story, they find themselves now, you know, panic-stricken, thinking, how in the world are we going to organize 3,200 additional people who work for the city? The final bargaining unit for the entire group, transit workers included in Tampa, was 3,600 people. These were the union eligible blue and white collar workers. Tampa's a big city, you know, it's a big port city and always has been an industrial city. So anyway, this was sort of a second near-death experience for these guys. Now here I come stumbling along, and they're well into the campaign to sign cards, but not just for the bus operators, but for the entire city. And I was in sanitation. So this became the story of how I was joining essentially the non-transit section of the transit union. I was never a transit worker. I was a sanitation worker, and eventually I ran a street sweeper and was in the streets department, but I was never a transit worker. But this was this kind of odd, almost bizarre necessity that came along for Local 1464 to organize everybody. So that local, we built it, we won the election, we got a first contract, we dug in, we recruited, we always had 900 to 1,000 dues payers. Sometimes we would get up to 12 or 1,300 out of that 3,600, which was far too few, but it was enough to function. It was enough to give us a union hall and give us some resources. The city at that time was very anti-union. It wouldn't surprise anybody here that was what we faced. But the going was tough, but we made the best of it and we organized, and this became the Local 1464, which is still there today. And when I returned, I left ATU as a member in the middle 80s when I met my wife, and I returned to ATU in 2013 as the International Union Organizing Director. So at that point, I caught up with, and I had kept minimal contact with the local since then, since I was there. When it got started, I would follow it online once the internet came along. So anyway, I began to get to know. Now, one of the things that had happened was that the bus system was broken out of this city and turned into a freestanding transit authority, which is the common structure in most of the country. So it is, still there, but as a separate local. But the city workers local, everybody else, still remains in Local 1464. So at the point that I was working with them when I was the International ATU Organizing Director, the Local 1464 bargaining unit had been reduced to about 2,400 members, but they always had about 1,000 or 1,100 members. Substantial, certainly a big local for that part side of Florida. But then, the rest is history now. The Republicans in Tallahassee for 20 years have been trying to unhinge that collective bargaining act. I'll say this, I wish that the Democrats would take a look at the Republicans. The Republicans understand the danger of trade unions, the cost of trade unions to the employers, and they hate us. And they have no problem working feverishly day and night, 24/7, to try to liquidate the trade union movement. I wish that the Democratic Party would look at that and say, wow, maybe we should defend these unions a little more vigorously, a little more, just as an aside, I'll just drop that out there. It always has infuriated me to see how utterly confused, weak, and timid the Democrats are invariably in case after case after case. When all you need to do is look at where the Republicans are at, they got no problem going to work to destroy us. Well, this is what has finally happened in Florida. The DeSantis regime, the foul individual known as DeSantis, has managed finally to jam through the legislature over furious resistance by the labor movement. But the problem is the labor movement in Florida is not growing like everywhere else. It's shrinking, and the Democrats are on the run, very confused. And anyway, this anti-union legislation got pushed through. And the review that you gave, Jacob, about all of the attacks, the specifics, you only missed one. This is what, just a review, because it was a few minutes ago. You have faced an annual election or decertification if you can't win the election, unless you're able to maintain a 60% membership level in your bargaining unit without dues checkoff. And then the other problem is you have to have a re-registration of your members on an electronic card that the state gives you. So they build in all these hurdles that force you to go back and talk to your same people. Now, so those of us that are real rank and file organizers would say, well, there's nothing wrong with that, Chris. Go talk to your members. Well, yeah, but this is an enormous new problem. These are locals that haven't really had to do this since they were first organized. And I suppose it's one hell of a lesson to learn. But my local 1464 is struggling. They've got, my understanding is they've got something like 1,100 people signed up. But again, that's short of the 60%. So when I was pondering this the other day, I thought, it may very well turn out, I hope not, but it may turn out that local 1464 reverts. It'll have to have an election. It'll have to win the election. But if it doesn't win the election, it will revert to the situation that they were faced with in 1959. This is what I was referring to about going completely around the wheel. And that the ATU will be compelled at that point in time to try to figure out, how do we hold together a city workers local that no longer has legal certified status? That's the worst case scenario. But based on the numbers and everything I've seen, that's quite possible. And I think I had mentioned, Adam, Jake, that this is happening all over Florida. Tremendous destruction right as we speak being visited on the labor movement down there. I am a bit mystified why it's virtually an unknown crisis that we face. Thousands, I think in the aggregate, it'll end up being tens of thousands of workers will be just administratively stripped of their union rights because of this foul deed by DeSantis and the Republicans in the state legislature. But, what can we do? I mean, there's some, I should have mentioned, I'm known, anybody that knows me knows that I don't mind talking about controversial things. And look, newsflash at the middle of the night here, folks, the labor movement's not perfect. Far from it. And one of the mistakes that was made in the beginning of that collective bargaining act when I was down there as a kid was that our labor movement, which at that time the AFL-CIO would have comprised the vast majority of the labor movement, not like today where it's only, a little bit more than half, but the AFL-CIO as a group, at that time dominated the scene, but they did absolutely nothing to police the land rush of unions into Florida to try to organize these public sector workers. Everyone just was overjoyed. We have this law, we can organize. And what it led to was this crazy quilt of 50 different unions grabbing and organizing the state workers, the county, the municipal, and there's no sense to it. If you were driving across Florida, you'll drive through jurisdictions that are, the same workers doing the same public sector pieces are represented by 50 different unions, and there's no coordination of anything. There's no common standards. So that cat is out of the bag. But when the attack came, it's part of what, labor was so completely divided on the ground that I think it contributed to this loss. Maybe we need to mark that up as how to avoid this in the future. But I don't find the AFL-CIO today saying anything about this. Now there's, none of us have a magic wand. We can't do anything about it. But if you're familiar with anybody in Florida in the public sector, they are facing a mortal threat as we speak. It's something. And, I may end up taking a trip down there to work with my old local because I think they're going through the processes of figuring out that this is a much more difficult process than what they thought it was going to be. This question of the threshold, the re-registration of your members on a whole new card, getting ready for an election, for a big group like that. I remember when I was there, organizing that city was almost hard to believe because you had to organize the entire place and you didn't have access. Certainly outside organizers won't have any access to this, but you're going to have to find guys like Chris Townsend that would run around at 4 o'clock in the morning and go to the unorganized departments. And you'll have to find a guy like me that'll go on his lunch break into other departments to talk to people and stay after work and chase people into. Back then, we used to go to pool rooms and gin mills and, find these guys and sign them up, and a few women that were there. I would think today there's a much larger group of women that work there. But so anyway, it's a test, and I appreciate you giving me the floor on that because I venture to say that this is generally an unknown liquidation that's being visited on the labor movement. And, I guess I just have that personal connection. So it's really something to think that all that work that we put in over the last 45 years may be put back where it came from in that non-majority hang on by a thread status. So it's a very sobering thing. It's but for the election of some of these right-wing anti-labor bigots, we could end up in that situation in any state. Everyone's probably familiar. We faced a version of this a few years ago in Wisconsin, in Ohio,
right,
and other places where the right wing, the business interest, the Republican Party has its tool. We go to any length to liquidate us. And again, I'll just wrap up on this guy by saying, I just wish, I know why they don't do it, but it just infuriates me that we don't get a more vigorous intervention by the Democratic Party on our behalf. They depend on us for a hell of a lot of votes, and they depend on us for hundreds of millions of dollars. But when it comes to them, defending us, even in these mortal combat situations, there's too few Democrats that will actually come to the rescue, I guess I'll say. So.
Right. Well, and like you said, this is something that's happened in Wisconsin in particular, and there very much was a huge destruction on, huge destruction was visited on the House of Labor in Wisconsin. Thousands of union members lost from our rolls, and so with that being what we saw in Florida, you mentioned about. You wonder if there might be a reversion of your old local to some of, if they were to get decertified, to some of the old tactics of, maybe not organizing to bargain, but organizing to win things, directly and just a less kind of formal kind of thing, and not relying on recognition as much. Do you think that would be more likely, or do you think that it would be more likely that ATU would pack up and go home and leave the workers to kind of fend for themselves?
Honestly, that's the $64,000 question. Knowing what I know about ATU, I think that's a distinct possibility because I've retired again. I was the most successful organizing director they ever had in the modern times in living memory. But the old guard leadership is not into these kinds of long, grueling projects. And, giving up is easier. And I think as I've observed this, I'm retired now, and it's been 4 decades since I was a member of that local, but I guess I do follow it, is I'm struck by and maybe this is true of so many of the unions, again, I had expressed there's been no big national publicity about this atrocity. There's been no coherent campaign of any kind that I can detect by labor to defend itself or to try to mobilize the Democrats. We have a guy parked in the White House, Joe Biden, that sits around and puts the crown on his head and claims that he's the most pro-union president in history. Well, the White House hasn't said anything about this, or they don't even know about it. This is not their gambit to get involved in this kind of real work to save unions. Let's get that on the record. But the thing that I've been struck by is the lack of imagination. For instance, the city of Tampa is today almost completely controlled by Democrats. Well, I'm kind of wondering if there is a set of Democrats in the city or anywhere else in Florida who will willingly defy what is a corrupt and unjust law. Think about this. The mayor of Tampa is told by the Public Employees Relations Commission to do these things. There's absolutely nothing stopping the city from saying, no, we will continue to honor the contract. We will continue to, deduct dues. But no, instead they run around with their hands up in the air saying, oh, well, we have to do that because DeSantis told us to.
Right.
Well, what kind of political representation is this? What kind of fight is this? You want to talk about a flabby nothing of a political force. This is a political farce. And I guess I don't go to that as sort of a shortcut. And I don't go to that, because I tend to be critical of Democrats. I go to that because I say, what is the purpose of this political party, and what does the labor movement get out of its unbelievable support for it if we have such an unjust and corrupt law jammed through the legislature, which, by the way, is also devised to split the labor movement. This does not apply to the police unions or the fire unions or the corrections officers. Those folks, they can still have a union because some of them, probably a higher proportion of them, support the Republican Party. Not all, but probably many. And anyway, I guess I'll just say that I would impart this to all the listeners. If our labor movement continues to allow this Democratic Party to have a sweet deal at our expense, where we rarely or never ask them to do the difficult things that need to be done. This one would be very difficult, but very necessary. We need the city council and the mayor to make the announcement that they're going to defy this unjust and corrupt law, and they're going to continue to respect the rights of those workers. Now, it's easy for me to say that here in the middle of the night, but I'll fall out of my chair if I hear anytime soon that has happened. I got to hope that someplace in Florida there would be some political administration of Democrats that would say, no, we're not going to. I mean, if you imagine if somebody said suddenly we were going to, go back 75 years in terms of civil rights or women's rights, or, there'd be an outcry. There'd be wow, this would be something. But no, this goes on and there's no mention of it. So at least that's my impression of it. I think I'm right, but I should hedge a little bit. But it is really an outrageous thing, and it's in the South. And I mean, surprise, surprise, it's in the U.S. South. Even though Florida had evolved for many decades sort of away from the old legacy of the South, or the legacies of the South, I think it's quite clear that we can see them now migrating back towards those pathologies and bigotries, for the time being anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just wanted to let you know, Chris, that there is a really good reporter at the Orlando Weekly that we talk to on occasion, McKenna Schuler. I'm typing up an email to her right now to see if she can, because she does stories like this. And so maybe she'll ask the mayor of Tampa, and we can get a story about that. But I'm typing up what we've been talking about and seeing if we can get her to get on it, because this is kind This is kind of her
It's
turf
appreciated.
and her sticks. So,
Well, and one last thing I'll mention, because it affected me personally. When you look at the 45 years since the legalization of the union in the public sector, 1464 now at the city of Tampa. 45 years ago, as one for instance, we were not covered by the minimum wage, the federal minimum wage. The city refused to pass its own city legislation saying we will abide by the national federal minimum wage. No. So what did that mean? It meant that when I got hired on the back of the garbage truck, I was hired at minimum wage. Oh, but it wasn't minimum wage. It was 10 cents less than the minimum wage, $2.55. The minimum at that time was $2.65. And the city administration did that just to rub your nose in it so that you knew that they were large and in charge and that you didn't have any federal rights to do anything about that. And there it is, $2.55. Now, the reason why I bring that up is this is the future. When I move my hand and say they're moving around the wheel, this is where this returns to. We will begin to see after the decertification, despite the fact that the Democrats run that city, we will see a natural tendency of them to want to reduce the entry-level wages, erode the benefits, come after things that they had been unable to take back during the negotiations when the union was able. This is inevitable. And should that city administration become Republican again, then bar the door. So this has a real, dollars and cents effect on workers there. It's just really, and I appreciate it. I feel an obligation to help my local, but I think the local's kind of learning the hard way, maybe through trial and error. I think they absolutely underestimated this. I'm thinking that all over the state there are groups that just thought, oh, well, that's not a big deal. But remember that it's been several years since we had the Janus decision.
right.
And we're seeing the erosion. We're seeing the employers kind of perfect their anti-union program, how to get people to drop out of the union, how to keep new hires from ever joining in the first place. And I would venture to say that, we all see this, your union exists and it, grows year by year and all this, and it becomes stale and it becomes sclerotic and membership suffers until you have folks like us that come along and want to really reinvigorate it, shock it back into shape, so to speak.
Yeah, there's so much that you've described and talked about this evening that resonates and that I could talk about. The Alabama Education Association went through its own dues deduction fight where they lost dues deduction and had to, convert everyone in a hurry to bank draft or credit card draft and all the, fiasco that comes with that. You become a bill collector. People's bank accounts change. People move. People, don't have the 40.
Yeah, well, and Adam, allow me an interruption. Joe Biden, again, our most pro-union president in U.S. history. Isn't he the federal tax collector that has payroll deduction for everybody working there to have federal tax money sucked out of their check? Yes, of course. How about state? Yes. How about local? Yes. Oh, how about the United Way? Yes. How about 22 other kinds of deductions that they allow? Well, right. Union dues is suddenly now something, again, we have silence on this question. And, that's why I am very hard on the Democrats. No one listening to this has heard that exclamation before, what I just yelled out there. Why in the world are labor unions singled out as the one and only organization that is prohibited from having dues deduction or monies deducted out of it? Well, it's anti-union bigotry. I mean, we know that here, but I haven't heard anything out of the White House. And before I complain about Joe Biden, where the hell is our labor movement that has helped to put this guy in office and keep him there? And I'm not going to move off of that. We have to expect better out of our labor leadership. We have to certainly expect better out of these political representatives that in many cases are only there because of the votes of union members, the efforts, door-to-door efforts of the union members, and the political contributions in the hundreds of millions of dollars that are, annually poured into these folks. I mean, this is a profoundly bad bargain in many ways. And anyone that would want to take me on that, I'll be glad to get an audience together and see what the members think about that. Let's have a little debate.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And, something you were talking about with the city of Tampa, I'm reminded of the minimum wage fight we had in Alabama, where the city of Birmingham passed a higher minimum wage than the federal. Alabama has no minimum wage, so we, de facto follow the federal. Alabama, legislature intervened very quickly, like within weeks, I believe. I think the legislative session was actually happening around the same time, and so they passed a preemption law and stripped cities from having the right to even do that. But to city of Birmingham's credit, to the Democratic administration's credit, they did fight it out in court, and at least make a token effort to put up a fight against it. For whatever reasons, perhaps their own electoral reasons, but still they did it. And so it's going to be interesting to see where some of these Democrats in Florida cities really line up, if they'll put their money where their mouth is. They're happy to get union dues, or union contributions in terms of PAC contributions. They're happy to get union members to go knock on doors for them. And so here's an easy opportunity to show what side you're on. It'll be really interesting to see what happens, and I appreciate you shedding some light on it, because we're going to see a huge drop in the numbers when the numbers come out. It's going to be bad, really bad. And
I should probably get the president of Local 1464, African American guy, Steve Simon, and I should probably introduce him to you guys for more reasons than one. He could tell the story better than me right on the ground. He's a very positive guy and a very upbeat guy, and I think this has put him to the test, because this is not a fair fight, and he's not dealing with the city of Tampa management. He's that local has kind of chastened and trained the management of that city, as happens in a lot of cases. So, but that's not who he's dealing with. He's dealing with a DeSantis regime that are just anti-union bigots to the core. And this is a bit of a tougher fight, I think, than what they might have expected. I guess you never really know how bad it is until you put through it, right? But this is one hell of a dangerous moment that puts everything at risk, knowing what the history is. When I was a kid down there, this sticks in my mind. I remember I went to a meeting. The union sent me to a meeting over in Orlando where there were all these public sector organizing campaigns being talked about, this frenzy of free-for-all activity of all these different unions organizing all these different things. Now, we all liked it. We all were uplifted by it to see so many different groups of public workers all trying to join, the unions at the same time. Yeah, there was something about that was very positive. But even then, I would say to myself, Jesus, this is maybe not good over the long haul. And in any case, I remember there was a delegate at the meeting from the laborers, construction laborers union, Leuna, and he had brought with him a road crew worker. I can't remember the county. It was one of the rural counties of Central Florida, where the road crew, the folks who patched the county roads and kept the weeds down and picked up roadkill and things, they made $1.60 an hour. It was 100% African American men. They made $1.60 an hour. Now, mind you, the minimum wage then, maybe by then, had moved up to $2.65, but $1.60, and they were struggling to join the laborers union to do something about this degraded situation. Now that maybe those are some of the extreme memories that I have, but any of us listening here would know that this is nothing that we're not going to return to in some form or fashion if we can't preserve these unions.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, I just appreciate you always just being willing to share your experiences and your wisdom with us, and your support, and appreciate all that you do for the movement and your true dedication to the movement.
Likewise.
I think it means a lot, and we're just all trying to do our part. And I do have to say I've learned a lot from our conversations, both on and off the air. I've learned a lot from you, and have really taken a lot of those lessons to heart. And something I think we talked about off the air was about, keeping it real with people. When I go to these speaking engagements and I have these room full of people, to keep it real about the conditions that we face as a working class. And, so that's been in the back of my head. And I've definitely been doing that. And, I've had a few weird looks, but I've also had a lot of support as well. So it's been going well.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.